My name is Guy Alberghini. This is a broadcast of the United States Constitution. Each broadcast will cover a very small section of the Constitution, policies that go against that section of the Constitution, as well as possible solution or solutions. If you just go along with the bad policies, then you agree with them. And if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Welcome back to the broadcast. My name's Guy Alberghini. We're happy to have back with us our friend from the LaRouche organization, Dennis Speed. Dennis, great to see you again.
Good to be here. So, I guess one thing we can talk about is something that's going to be coming up. It's going to be on May 8th and May 9th. May 8th is Victory in Europe Day, 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. In Russia, it's May 9th because the day that the war ended, it ended at 11:01 Central European time. So it was already the next day in Russia. And so this was 1945, and it's the one that caused all of the big celebrations. And one thing that we'll find out, I know that there have been a couple of American veterans that have been over in Russia. And Oliver Stone, the filmmaker, and Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern is a former CIA analyst. He was in CIA for 27 years, especially with Russia. And he and Oliver Stone spending some time in Russia as veterans, because remember, the Stone is a Vietnam War veteran. Ray was Vietnam era as well. And they were concerned that as President Trump tries to resume relations with the nation of Russia, that people are looking only at the Ukraine issue rather than the United States and Russia and their history, which is very interesting because actually, I don't know whether people know this or not, but the United States has never fought a war against Russia, nor has Russia ever fought a war against the United States, at least not an acknowledged war. But you can say the Cold War was that. Then again, that wasn't even yet. Even if you go to the point of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Now, some argue that the recent conflict in Ukraine is really an American-Russian thing. Well, but as Donald Trump has said, believe him or not, he says, hey, if I were president, it wouldn't have happened. And certainly, there's been an attempt to resurrect or recreate the relationship between Russia and the United States. So I think it's important to just say that there's kind of a process that should be looked at, especially when you consider that there were 27 million Russians that died in the course of the Second World War between 1941 and 45. To compare that, there were about 500,000 Americans that died. I don't mean that should belittle the American thing. I mean, America wasn't, Russia's right there where the war was. America wasn't. It was separated by an ocean. But America, the United States, in those early days when Russia needed assistance, was provided that assistance through what was called the Lend-Lease Bill of the early 40s, 41, 42 period. And as a result of that, the battles that really stopped the Nazi force, especially the Battle of Stalingrad, the largest battle in human history, over 2 million combatants, that could be fought by the Russians, and they were able to sustain that battle through 41, the late summer of 41, into early 42, and ultimately destroying the von Paulus's Sixth Army and the general Nazi force. That war means something very different in Russia, even than it means in America. As we are speaking, there are about 70,000 people still alive in Russia who are veterans of the war, and about 65,000, roughly, Americans still alive who are veterans of that war. So this will be the last major ceremony that these people will attend. And that World War II generation pretty much shaped the present world. So that relationship between Russia and the United States is way more important than people, maybe not than people think, but when you look at the nuclear arsenals of those two nations, if you put them together, nobody comes near it. Whether you're talking about China, India, or other of the countries, Israel for that matter, others that have nuclear weapons, the preponderance of nuclear arsenals in the world, over 90% of those weapons are between those two countries. And so it gets interesting to really look at the history. And importantly, Russia supported the American Revolution. Catherine the Great was the Tsarina then. And then in the Second World War, in the Civil War, 1861 to 65, Tsar Alexander II sent the Russian fleet, the Russian Navy, to New York and to San Francisco to assist Abraham Lincoln and the Union cause. What was happening was that the Union was trying to blockade the South or prevent the South from conducting trade. And there were Southern ships running the blockade. And also they were threatening Northern ports. And the Tsar sent the fleet, the Russian fleet, to those two locations. And they were placed in effect under the supervision, though not directly exactly. Obviously, they had their own commanders, but of Abraham Lincoln. People have no idea, of course, that was the case. And one of the other important stories of that time concerning Russia was the American ambassador to Russia, who was there and helped with the emancipation of the serfs, which was in 1861, and which then led, in one sense, by example, to the Emancipation Proclamation of the United States in 1863. That ambassador's name was Cassius Marcellus Clay. Yes, that Cassius Clay, who was from Kentucky, after whom the fighter was, the name was taken. Of course, Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali for his own reasons. And he talked about the fact that he didn't want that old slave master's name. Actually, Cassius Clay was an abolitionist. And he wasn't just an abolitionist, he was a fighter who carried a massive Bowie knife, which protected him once in the 1840s when he was nearly shot as an abolitionist. He was shot. The bullet hit the blade of his knife, and then he proceeded to pull out the blade of his knife and pursue his would-be assassin and kill him in a way that I won't describe on a family-friendly broadcast. Cassius Clay was such a problem in Kentucky, which of course was, a slave state, that he became the ambassador. Lincoln sent him as the ambassador to Russia. But then over in Russia, he created such a ruckus, advocating again for the abolition of serfdom and slavery, that he eventually, they began to clamor for him to come back to America. So a little history about our American ambassador to Russia at that period. And so Russia, remember, sold the United States Alaska. People talk about that as Seward's folly, Seward being the Secretary of State during that period of Lincoln's second president, first and second presidencies, sold in 1867. And the reason for that was that the Russians were allied with the Americans with the idea of building a naval force to counter British imperial dominance in the Pacific as well as the Atlantic. Yeah, that's what the name of the game was. People don't remember that the United States was seen as a revolutionary nation. It was persona non grata. In fact, no head of state of any nation had visited the United States until 1876, until after the time of Cassius Marcellus Clay and after the time of Abraham Lincoln, because the United States was considered to be so far out there from the standpoint of the monarchs of the world. If you went there, you were sort of endorsing the idea of regicide, right? Killing of kings. It was the king. It was I don't know if it was an actual emperor, but it was a representative from the nation of Brazil who came in 1876. So it's interesting to look at Russia and the history of America's relationship to Russia and look at this date of May 8th, 9th, and look at the idea and the difference in the ideas between America and Russia of that time. One last thing just to say about that is that, Dwight D. Eisenhower, of course, was the supreme commander of Allied expeditionary forces during the Second World War, and then became president of the United States and was president of the United States for 2 terms, and from 1952 through 1960. And in 1956, when there was a dispute concerning the Suez Canal with Egypt, where France and England were on one side, and Israel, for that matter, were on one side, and Egypt was on the other side, as well as the Soviet Union. Eisenhower backed Egypt and that they should have the control of the canal because it was part of Egypt. It shouldn't go to either Israel or France or England. They wanted it because they had control of the area historically from colonial times. And that's often talked about as the point at which the United States became the dominant power in the world, not World War II, because the British were still the dominant power. Their global empire was still far more extended. They were the only true global power at 1945. But in 1956, once that action happened and the United States went in a different direction, that's talked about as the time when the United States became the truly global power in the world. So it's sort of interesting to still look at these things in history and look at what President Trump is trying to do. Whatever you think of him or the vice president, who, by the way, disagrees with what I just said concerning Eisenhower's position in 56, the vice president thinks Eisenhower made a mistake. I'm certain that Eisenhower did not. But that's the same Eisenhower that pushed the idea of atoms for peace. And while that may not seem to have a lot to do with the Second World War, it's important to realize that Eisenhower was commanding all the forces in Europe. And when he was asked about the idea of dropping the atomic bomb on Japan, that was because they'd already surrendered in Europe, he said, no, don't do it. He was opposed to it. He didn't see any reason that had to happen. He knew that the Japanese were trying to negotiate for peace. He did not see a reason for that to be dropped. And what he did after the war, when he became president, is he created a program called Atoms for Peace. It was all about the idea of nuclear power plants, and it was a big deal because, of course, the bomb had been used. So, hey, we got to somehow contain this technology. Let's get it out of the hands of the military, put it in the hands of engineers, and use it for peaceful purposes. Now, I tell you that story because it was only, I think, let me get these dates right. I think it was around the 24th of April. The foreign minister of Iran, a guy named Araghchi, I think is how you say his name. He gave a speech for the Carnegie Institute in America, Carnegie Institute for International Peace. And he said, we have a proposal for the United States. Why doesn't the United States work with Iran and help us build nuclear power plants for energy production for our country? After all, we have oil. So there's oil for nuclear. But more than important than that, if the United States gets involved with us with that, then you can be on site and you can see that we have no intention of building a nuclear weapon because you're going to be there. You're going to be working with us. This just got proposed. And then he said, the reason we want to do this is that our original nuclear program, they have one operating nuclear power plant. Our original nuclear program was inspired by and catalyzed by Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace. A lot of Americans don't know that America was in Iran from 1954 to 1979. And I say in Iran, I mean working hand in glove, industrializing Iran. Some people say, of course, it was there to get the oil, but we were there.
Is that the time frame that you had the Shah of Iran?
Yeah, the Shah came in. The Mossadegh was the guy's name who was replaced. It was a coup. It was run by Kermit Roosevelt of America and the CIA and by British intelligence. They replaced him with the Shah of Iran, and the Shah ruled for that period of about 25 years. And he was deposed in 79. But yes, that's when the United States was there, and it was very, very much involved. So it's interesting that the Iranians would say that because now Iran has a defense or military agreement with Russia, and Russia is the world's leading producer of nuclear power plants, having taken that over from the United States that stopped building them. Well, not entirely. They do build some still, but sort of downsize the program in big time after 3 Mile Island in 1978, 78, 79. So the proposal the Iranians are actually making may be a proposal that would only be implementable if you had the United States working with Russia. So this image from World War II of the US and the Russians working against fascism, and it may end up being able to be used to address what seems to be an insoluble problem everybody remembers about Iran. And, okay, maybe they can have peaceful nuclear power, but how do you know they're not going to build a weapon? And frankly, they've been ambivalent about that, even though they make many different statements. So I just like people to keep their eye on this ceremony that's going to be happening just for a couple of days. It's also a time when Putin is saying he wants a ceasefire with Ukraine. It's only a 3-day truce, he's calling it, actually. He's not calling it a ceasefire, truce. But maybe some things are going to develop that would be good for the whole world. But the United States will have to be right in the center of whatever that development will be for it to really have teeth. And so you see how sometimes history and historical events can resonate in the present and can shape things that affect the future.
Yeah, and I haven't heard yet if Ukraine is accepting the truce. I don't know if you heard anything.
Well, no, I think that the Ukraine thing is going to be pretty interesting. The Ukraine is really NATO. It's really the case that the war, the New York Times had an article, at the very end of March, followed an article that, and then another article in the London Times came out, which talked about how the war has been actually being run from Wiesbaden, West Germany, ever since April of 2022. It began in February of 2022. And in February, I think it was around February 24th, if I'm not mistaken, of 2022, about 3 days later, the British Ministry of Defense started something they call Project Alchemy. And they had people in Ukraine, helping to run the war on the ground from that time. Then as the war progressed over 2023 and 2024, there was more and more involvement of more sophisticated weaponry that had to have a supervision from NATO because Ukrainians didn't know how to run this stuff. And so even if you don't go with the idea that Boris Johnson prolonged the war, which I believe happened when he, on April 9th of 2022, told Zelensky, who had agreed to take the deal with Putin, he said, don't take the deal. They already had initialed the documents. They'd had these meetings that had happened over in Turkey, and they'd already were ready. And then Boris Johnson flew in and said, don't take the deal. And if you notice, ever since that February 28th altercation at the White House with Zelensky, Trump is saying one thing and Vance is saying one thing, and Keir Starmer from London and Macron from France are saying the other. And every time Trump is saying he's doing something, they're doing something. They were doing something the opposite. So I think that Ukraine and what it does will be, in one part, very much contingent on what Europe tries to induce Ukraine to do. They're trying to tell Ukraine they can fight on, but the Russians have this 500,000 person army, also augmented, as we now found out, by North Korea. And Ukraine and Europe is not prepared to do any of that. I mean, the Russians can outproduce the entirety of Europe plus the United States militarily with munitions by multiple times over at half the budget, or not even half the budget, a tenth of the budget. Mm-hmm. So you can't beat them militarily. You got to negotiate. That's what Trump, of course, knows. That's what he was saying when he told Zelensky, you don't have the cards. He was trying to be nice about it, because he said, hey, listen, I wasn't there when this started. I'm telling you, it wouldn't have started if I were there. And what he means by that is, number one, I wouldn't have let you do it because I know how this is going to come out. And number two, I would have talked to the Russians. What's the deal? What's the real problem here? Let's work this thing through. And so it's a nasty situation now. I don't know how that's going to really end. I don't think anybody does, except that get a Russian military victory, which wouldn't be too nice. Which is
and our friends, in the air quotes, always throw themselves in the mix to keep wars going.
Yeah, well, you have this problem, British intelligence, as they call it. I don't believe in that. I think it's kind of an oxymoron, it's not too intelligent, in other words, is trying to instigate things using American money, American logistics, American resources. And I think it's time for us to stop that. And I think it's a good thing to talk about the idea, hey, we don't need war. Look at that. It's $1 trillion budget now. What could you do with that? What about other countries? And so it's an interesting time we're living in. All the rules are being thrown out of the rule book, or the rule book's being thrown out, I should say. The chessboard has been overturned. So you can't really play the chess game because the entire board is on the floor with all the pieces. And so it gives us an opportunity to maybe construct a new security and development architecture. In fact, we're having a conference in New York City area on May 24th and 25th, Saturday and Sunday. In fact, the first day, I'm glad I hadn't thought for a minute. That first day, we're going to have the last American ambassador to the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock, who was there when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union dissolved. He's going to be speaking. Chaz Freeman, who is the person who translated for Nixon when Nixon went to China and became a diplomat after that as well. He's going to be speaking. The former foreign minister of South Africa, Naledi Pandor, powerful woman in many areas of diplomacy. She's going to be speaking. Helga Sepp LaRouche, who's the founder, former wife of Linda LaRouche, or wife of Linda LaRouche, deceased. She'll be speaking. Ray McGovern, who I mentioned, who's right now probably coming back actually from Russia, or about to come back. He'll be speaking. And the idea of that panel is to discuss, hey, can we create a new security architecture, a new, not something that's not NATO, is not a big defense pact, but is going to give people security in Europe, Asia, whatever. Is there a way to do that through economic development? Maybe that's the way to go after this. And so that's going to be coming up on, as I say, on Saturday and Sunday, May 24th and 25th. Other panels will happen that day, but I think people might find that interesting. We'll also have it up online, by the way. There'll be more to say about that. People can also watch it online if they can't come to that conference.
Okay. So along with like going to conferences like these, what should the population, the viewers, be doing to, improve this nation, turn the nation around into the right direction?
I think there's two things that people all have within the capacity to do. First of all, the LaRouche organization we organize every day. We've been doing it every day, since January 1st, January 2nd of 1974. We are a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day organization. We do that by writing. We do that by being out on the street. We do that by doing various petitioning. We do that sometimes by endorsing candidates for office. So people can get in touch with the LaRouche organization, and there's always stuff we're doing. I mean, literally every day of the week, whether you are a reader or a writer, whether you are the kind of person that likes to talk to people, do outreach, or whether you're the kind of person that wants to help out by contributing either financially or in some other capacity. That's number one. And the second project I'll just say is to help celebrate the 250th anniversary of our country, which is something every American has a right to do that. In fact, I think even has a responsibility to do that. And that's as of April 19th of 2025, in other words, about a month ago, well, not quite a month ago, that was the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775, when the American irregulars, as they might have been called, 700 of them, confronted the British as they attempted to suppress the colonists, get down to their storehouse.
Dennis, we have less than a minute left.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So that's the thing that people can do. We're already in that celebration. So it's a good idea for you to join in doing that. There's various organizations I think people can get in touch with. Again, if you want to get in touch with the LaRouche organization, we're pushing that in a big way, and we welcome you to be part of that.
And I myself been on many deployments in the Great Boston area with the group, and fun dialogues with the population, and way to improve your own mindset also. So if you just go along with bad policies, you agree with them. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Dennis, thank you very much for joining us again. See you the next month.
Great.
Thank you very much for watching this broadcast. As it says at the beginning of the preamble, we the people. That's you, that's myself. Are you part of the solution or part of the problem? One way to tell is if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. So call, email, meet with your reps and senators, local leaders, tell them what they should be doing. They govern with the consent of the governed, and if you don't tell them what to do, it's implied that you agree with them and they're doing what you want them to do. So thank you very much again, and look forward to seeing you during the next broadcast.